So I'm really glad that the second presidential debate brought out Mitt Romney's true colors, and his true colors were already evident throughout the campaign, but of course, as you know, as the campaign keeps going on, we'll just see it more and more. Let's just hit it face on. He's not going to get black voters. And a lot of people like to dismiss that as racial solidarity. And certainly there is some aspect of racial solidarity, but there are a few key facts that make it clear that racial solidarity is not the only reason that Mitt Romney won't get any, virtually any, I'm not going to say any, obviously, and I'm not a black spokesperson, but virtually every poll shows that Barack Obama has 99% of black Americans vote, and that though less energized, slightly less energized than the coming of Obama in 2008, this year, people have less romanticized the idea of the change that we really want, and we're coming to terms with change management, just as any organization would, of what actually change is. You say you want change, but now the change is actually here. Well, we saw the obstructionist Congress, the gerrymandering, bullying. When I say bullying, I even mean that that you lie comment in the State of the Union address, the blatant sorts of disrespect. And what it comes down to was in this second presidential debate like no other, and binders full of women comment. Now, I think a lot of black people, when they hear that, they clearly hear it as patronizing. And it's not just that representative of the fact that, perhaps Mitt Romney doesn't understand inclusion, what it means to include, because he's still taking the token approach. We'll count one here, one there. If some benevolent, white leader happens to think of diversity as a factor, then we'll add it. That's not change. That's what we've been doing. That's the whole point. And therefore, quite clearly, it's not inclusion. It's not building an inclusive society. And so when we hear that, even as a young black person sort of coming to terms with themselves in a society, that would strike a very negative chord. It's sour. There's no other way to say that it's sour. Even if I don't think a lot of people can say, I don't know what that is, or even the word patronizing itself. But you know it when you feel it, and it's a form of disrespect. It's not a form of respect at all that Mitt Romney, may have even hired one or two of those women, or even try to get a woman of color to tick 2 diversity boxes, give themselves 2 pats on the back as benevolent white men. Because of course now what does it mean? Once these women are on the job, are they going to be in any way included? Are they going to be tokenized? I shouldn't have to get into what the differences are in those, but I think in the workplace now, we've seen with the 2007, 2008 crash in the economy, we saw what a lack of diversity can do. You had a bunch of elite educated white men who got into this system of groupthink where no one questioned the morality of predatory lending, of all sorts of immoral things that were not legal, but loopholes. And so to see that Mitt Romney has benefited from that, on top of that, he aligns himself with them. So there are all these things that come into play when I think black voters look at Mitt Romney. And so it's not as easy as to dismiss racial solidarity anymore, however, that one can acknowledge white racial solidarity. I think on the other side, the fear tactics that the Republicans have used since before the days of Willie Horton, even back to Moynihan and in the 60s and the decay of the black family. But the idea that there's this predator from within of American society and the guts of society that's going to both feed America its pop culture, black culture, and black urban decay is always fed, or even black rural decay is always fed America its pop culture. We are said to be more in touch with God, more in touch with ourselves, and then that comes out in the beats and rhythms and rhymes that you hear through rock, spirituals, gospel, hip-hop, and then influence all form of popular music, from rock and roll to the 70s rock and all those blue-eyed soul groups, including, today to Adele. So you see this feeding off of this culture, but at the same time you see feeding off of it from votes. Again, with the Willie Horton, the crime. I think the hip-hop thug embodies both that, the salaciousness of that kind of raw power, but then also, lock them up, basically. And, playing on that anti-crime narrative has always galvanized conservative support. And what that conservative support is unraveling as white supremacist. I mean, it's not just that the Republican Party has always been, not always, because, back before the party switched, in a sense, the turn of the last century, these Republicans, this Republican Party has built itself around white power and promoting implicit white power, getting votes through, there's a scary Negro that's going to get your gun, there's a welfare president, and so you have rich elite whites and poor whites that are both scared of this dark other, when in fact it's the elite control of the economy that is really keeping us all from moving forward, both poor people and working people, but also the elite. In thinking that power is only yielded and maintained in a certain way, I think does, in a sense, feed the egomaniac personalities that is a kind of a Mitt Romney. So when he says that, he benevolently would get a binder full of women and pick one and, and let them work in his workplace, it's also a narrative about white masculinity, the hero narrative, that we are the ones that have to save the day, that our decisions are the most important. It's the flip side of implicit racial bias. There is a way that boxes white men into being something that perhaps they as individually not authentically not. And knowing the personal side of that political side is something that characterizes the black experience in many parts of the world, of seeing how just sort of being able to perceive the implicit ways that we communicate. We've had to navigate ourselves in majority white, oppressive, violently oppressive, coercive societies, including dealing with modern liberals who are perhaps less aware of the sort of microaggressions that we face, sort of microaggressions that lead to a Trayvon Martin murder. Those things become so important to us because we see the personal and political, and even if it's difficult to articulate, and I think that it is, for me, that's what my videos are largely about, is articulating this link between the personal and political. We see that everything this Mitt Romney resonates politically as personally very narrow-minded, personally very, just very oppressive, very prejudiced, very racist, very classist, very sexist. And, these comments will keep popping out. Now, the dilemma is we associate that with power. And that has meant power in the past. We talk about our Constitution itself, and oh, what a wonderful document, but we know that it was framed by elite, at that time that meant literate, land-owning, white, Protestant males of English heritage, rarely of Irish or Scottish or German or French or Italian, but specifically, that. And there's even research now that looks at, even here in England, about how even just certain last names that had privilege in the 1800s, those families still have privilege today. They're more likely to attend the most elite schools, to, monopolize the most high-paying jobs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So when we talk about elite control, we have to understand that, okay, so we're in a state of elite control, and so we learn to associate elitism with power, and yet it leaves most of us powerlessness, except to mimic elitism. So the dilemma is, can you segregate power, false power, from real power? We all stand in awe of false power. And we see it. That Mitt Romney is that kind of false power. And yet Obama, in many, many ways, represents the opposite. Not just someone who pulled himself up by his bootstraps, but we saw all the people around him and the cultures around him that enabled that. And that's the society that we want to build, where we have, tons and tons of Barack Obamas and Michelle Obamas. people who can write, read, who want to do community organizing as a career, who perhaps want to pursue politics, that people feel freer to do whatever they want to do. And that's what we've seen in Barack Obama. That's what the hope is about. It's not just what he says, but it's who he is. And the fact that he rarely, if ever, speaks to me as an American in such a patronizing tone. I think most people saw the, Americans retreat to their guns in churches. People saw that as somewhat patronizing, but then as someone who has, who those guns and churches are directed at oppressing, as a black male in the criminal justice system or as a gay male in the churches, yielding of homosexuality as sort of against all the other things, perhaps like the Kardashians and the Britney Spears, that kind of give a bad name to heterosexual marriage. So it's been targeted towards us. And again, that targeting, it's like, something's not right there. It says more about you. It says more about, bullying says more about the bully than the person that's bullied, the victimizer than the victim. And that's all of what we see when we look at someone like Mitt Romney.